Hello everyone, I'm Robert. Welcome back to our Data Management 1 module. In this video, we will be talking about the summarize and group by function from the dplyr package. The combination of these two functions is pretty useful. We'll talk about them in more detail in Data Management 3. This video is just a brief introduction. We'll load in our packages, clear the global environment, and load in our Houston flight state set. Let's start with the summarise function. The summarise function can help us generate summary statistics and export them to a separate data frame. Each summary statistic will become a new variable in the new data frame. The syntax of the summarise function is pretty similar to the mutate function that we talked about. First, we will pass in the name of the data frame. Then we'll pass in the name of the first variable. This variable will store the first summary statistic. Then we put an equals mark. On the right side of the equals mark, we'll put the expression that will be used to generate the summary statistic. If we want to include multiple summary statistics, we'll simply put a comma here, and then we'll put the second variable name, an equals mark, and the second expression, so on and so forth. R provides us with a lot of useful functions to generate summary statistics. As we can see here, we have functions related to the center, spread, and range of the data. To use these functions, we'll just pass the variable name into the function. And also, most of these functions include an argument called na.rm. This argument asks us whether we want to remove the NAs when applying these functions to the variable. We always want to set it to true because otherwise these functions will likely to return NAs. There are two other useful functions, n and indistinct. The n function returns the number of observations within each group. If we don't group our data, it will just return the total number of observations in the data frame. The indistinct function returns the unique total number of unique observations within each group. Again, if we don't group the data, it will just return the number of unique values in the whole data frame. Great. Let's now look at some examples using the summarise function. In the first example, we want to calculate the average arrival delay and store it to a new data frame. So in the summarise function, we'll first pass in the name of the data frame, DAT. Then we'll pass in the variable name, AVG delay. This variable will store the mean of arrival delay. And we put an equals mark. On the right side of the equals mark, we'll use the mean function to calculate the average delay. Inside the mean function, we'll just pass in arrival delay and set na.remove to true. When we run this, we get S1. In S1, we only have one row and one column, and this is the average delay of all the flights in the Houston flight dataset. We can generate multiple summary statistics at the same time and put them into the same data frame, as we can see here in the next example. In this example, aside from generating the average delay, we also want to know the standard deviation and the maximum value of arrival delay. The only difference here is that we will put a comma and put two other variables and two other expressions into the summarise function. So here we use the SD function to generate the standard deviation and store the standard deviation to the variable called SD delay. And similarly, we use the max function to generate the maximum value and store it to max delay. We'll need to set na.remove to true in all of these functions And notice here, we can simply type a capital T instead of the whole word true. When we run this, we get S2. In our S2, we have 3 columns. Each column represents a different summary statistic. So we have average, standard deviation, and maximum value here. As you might have noticed, in our S1 and S2, we only have 1 row. That's because we didn't group our data. If we group our data using the group by function, we'll have multiple rows, and each row will represent a distinct group. So let's take a look at the group by function. The syntax is pretty simple. We'll first pass in the dataset name, and then we'll pass in the variable or variables that we want to group the dataset by. Let's look at an example using the group by function alone. So here we want to group the dataset using unique carrier. We'll pass the dataset name into the group by function and then the variable name unique carrier. When we run this, we get G1. And when we look at G1, we can see that G1 is actually the same as the original dataset, DAT. So this shows that the group by function will not change how the dataset looks like. It will group the data points internally, and the effects can only be seen when we use the group by function together with the summarise function. So now let's look at an example using these 2 functions together. Here, we want to first group the dataset using the unique carrier variable, and then we want to generate the average delay for each different unique carrier. This is a combination of the 2 examples that we have done before. We'll first use the group by function and then use the summarise function. Notice that we use the pipe operator to combine these commands in this example. And when we use the pipe operator, we don't have to pass the dataset name into these functions. If you're still not familiar with the pipe operator, please refer to the link in the description. When we run these 3 lines, we'll get G2. And let's take a look at G2. We can see that we have 2 columns. The first column is the variable that we group the dataset by. The second column is the average delay. So as we can see here, we have 15 distinct airlines. And we have the average delay for each of these airlines. Great. And these are some easy examples using the summarise and group by function. And I will talk about more examples in the next video. So see you guys next time.